Maybe that's the one to put on the calendar.
Welcome back to another episode of the D3 Datacast. Today is another special episode because we have a special guest. I'm Zach, joined by Matt as always, and today we have a third member of the episode, Ryan Whitnable, Marietta alum, D3 Hoops, Twitter extraordinaire, D3Hoops.com voter, creator, curator, and executive director, shall we say, of the Great Lakes Invitational. To welcome Ryan, we have the Marietta Ban Johnson Arena behind me. Matt says I pander. I say it's a show of hospitality. Ryan, where do you come down on that?
Guys, I think it looks great. I'm going to go with hospitality, and I appreciate it.
Older brother's always right. We wanted to bring Ryan on because the Great Lakes Invitational has become one of the premier Division III basketball events. Certainly had a prominent spot as we were going through some of the top 50 matchups that we're expecting to see here to start the season in the month of November. So most of this episode is going to be dedicated to talking about the Great Lakes Invitational in general and this year's event, which looks to be another great one. But first, we do have a preseason D3Hoops.com top 25. And we happen to have a full 8% of the electorate here between Ryan and Matt. So, guys, are there any just initial reactions as you were looking through the top 25 for the first time? Ryan, as the guest, we'll start with you.
Yeah, preseason polls are always really interesting. I think if you look at last year's preseason poll, we had 65 teams, 65, 70 teams ranked. And that number gets chopped down pretty quickly as we get into the first and second weeks of the polls. So when I'm looking at a preseason poll, I tend to focus on the top, and I think there's a pretty clear grouping or a cluster of teams at the top that I think most voters have kind of centered around. And those are the ones that I'm focusing on. And I think it's your 1 through your 8s. Your Randolph-Macon, of course, at the top with the 17 first place votes. Mary Hardin Baylor, four first place votes. Oshkosh and Christopher Newport got 2 apiece. And then Oswego, Williams, Mount Union, and WPI. There's a pretty big gap back to Stockton. I think that's where your conversation begins of kind of the other contenders, other teams in the conversation, but maybe aren't quite in that elite category as we start the year. So I try to focus on where we are at the top at this point in the year. I think that's a good conversation starter. And then I think as you get back, 10 back through 25 into your other receiving vote, those are teams that we think are going to be in the conversation. But honestly, there's just so many question marks when everyone's 0-0.
Yeah, for me, my first time doing this exercise, it's only in the last couple of weeks that I was asked to be a voter. So jumping into this new, for me, I went right back to Randolph-Macon at the top. I know they lose some talent, in particular Buzz Anthony, but that team was so good and so loaded last year that I was comfortable putting them right back in that top spot. And then I had a very difficult time trying to figure out the last 10 spots, 5 spots in particular. I really had at least 35 teams who at some point in the process, I thought to myself, it would be really nice to get this team ranked. And a bunch of those teams ended up off of my list. And that was difficult. I know in past years, some voters have commented that after number 15, there wasn't really anyone they wanted to rank. And for me, this year was different in that there was a whole bunch of teams vying for those final maybe 10 or even 15 spots. Kind of as Ryan was indicating, there's some question marks there. A team that's really good returning a bunch of talent like Trinity, Texas was just off of my ballot. I really wanted to rank them. I ended up keeping them just off. Other teams were in that mix as well. Probably can't name them all, but Case Western Reserve, Middlebury, Rowan, teams didn't make my ballot, but I really wanted to get them in. I thought I was going to get them in for much of the process.
This sets up kind of maybe the unofficial beginning of the season. We have a poll. You can start looking at those early matchups as ranked matchups now. I guess just Ryan, any other thoughts that you have, generally speaking, of your excitement for the upcoming season?
Yeah, I think it's another really deep D3 hoops field this year. And I think, last year we had, Randolph-Macon was number 1 for the majority of the year. I think there was a 2, 3, 4 week period maybe where Sheba was number 1 for a couple of weeks. But it was kind of an odd year where Macon almost went wire to wire. And I think, Macon went wire to wire the year before as well. We've turned over a lot of that talent across D3 hoops in general, with the COVID 5th year we've seen a lot of teams lose a lot of experience. And so you have, I would say, programs that are consistently at the top every year that are breaking in some new guys into some new roles that will be really interesting to see. We have some teams that we felt like maybe were a year away last year. And I'm thinking of teams like maybe an Oswego State or a Keene State. So and even like a Rochester who also adds back an All-American into their mix. They're also going to be in the conversation. So I'm not sure that we're going to have that wire to wire team or that team that's going to be at the top all year. I think it's going to be a little bit more messy this year.
We like messy. Messy is fun.
Yeah, I think you framed that well, and I think we're going to see a very balanced top 25 and maybe beyond that. In particular, there's going to be a lot of parity in my mind. I'm sure someone will rise to the top, but it looks like there's going to be a lot of good teams or a lot of teams in that mix.
So getting into the main reason we wanted to bring Ryan on is to have a little discussion about the Great Lakes Invitational. For those who maybe are new to the Great Lakes Invitational, could you give us just maybe a little bit of the backstory, how it came to be? It's been around for a few years now, but take us up through maybe the conceptual stage and kind of getting through those early years to where we are now.
Yeah, so I had the first kind of idea, I would say back during the 2015 season. I was actually at the time doing the podcast around Great Lakes basketball, and I had just wrapped up. It was a January or a February conversation with Mike DeWitt at Ohio Wesleyan, and for several years, Ohio Wesleyan had on their schedule something that they called the Great Lakes Challenge. And in some years they had some teams coming in from around the region, but other times and I think that in that particular year, they had sort of a cross-conference battle between OAC teams in the Columbus region, Otterbein, Capital, and then the two North Coast Athletic Conference teams in that same region, Wittenberg and Ohio Wesleyan. And that just happened to be a year where there was a great imbalance. I know Capital and Otterbein were really down that year, and Ohio Wesleyan and Wittenberg were kind of at the height of the North Coast. And I remember thinking to myself, it'd be really great, if maybe instead of, Otterbein or Capital that year, it could have been Marietta and John Carroll. That would have been a really great cross-conference weekend event. So, from there, I kind of chewed on that idea a little bit and thought of, maybe it would be fun to have a 4-team event across the Great Lakes where you invite, conference favorites from some of the bigger conferences in the region. And then from there, it kind of ballooned into this 8-team event where we, invite in teams to play some of the best teams in what is now Region 7. And I'll be honest, for a long time, it was just a pipe dream, a what if. But it finally got to the point where, I wanted to reach out and kind of test the waters and see, if some people out there in the community thought it was feasible. So I sent out, an email to some coaches that I really trusted their opinions and felt really strongly about. And to be honest, some of them didn't respond. Some of them thought it was a nice idea, but thought that, we'd never be able to get it off the ground. And 2 coaches, I still to this day thank both of them. John Vanderwall at Marietta and Hope. Marietta and Hope were the 2 who really embraced the idea and thought, what, it's worth having a conversation. Maybe we can do this. So being an alma mater at Marietta, Marietta was kind of the first one I jumped to, went down to campus and walked into Coach Vanderwall's office. And to his credit, I kind of laid out the vision for, what I envisioned. I think he would not disagree that he gave me a look of, you're crazy. This will never, you'll never be able to get 8 teams into Marietta, especially from across the country. But he left the door open to it, and he kind of, left it at, if you can get the teams in, and if you can get 8 teams to agree to it, we'll find a way to make this happen. 6 weeks later, I had all 8 teams on board and came back and said, let's figure out a way to do this. And we had plotted for 2017 to be the first year we were going to do it. Had 2 years to kind of plan for that first event, and started building out the schedule and designed a logo for it. And that was kind of how it all got started.
Do you find now it's easier to get coaches to respond to you as you're, looking ahead to future events and trying to plan?
Yeah, that first event, I 6 weeks seems like a quick timeline, but it was a little bit pulling teeth with some of the coaches to to kind of sell them on an idea that had never taken place before. And, there were so many questions and concerns about, how this was going to work and all of those things. Nowadays, it is a lot easier, I will say. It's gotten a little bit more attention on the national stage. Coaches now will reach out about wanting to participate in the event, as opposed to me having to do a lot of the invitations. And every year it seems to get a little bit easier as that momentum continues with the event. And now I think with some of the success we had last year, having 3 of the 4 teams in the Final Four at the event, that certainly gets people's attention as well. And the inbox is a little fuller than it was, 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah. To that point, with especially with the success of last year, you've become something of a Division III sommelier, finding the best pairings, the choicest pairings out there for us. What is that process like of getting teams to come in? Are they applying? Are you reaching out? Is there a combination of both? Obviously, there's some level of strength that you're looking for as far as the team quality. Just look at last year. I'm sure there was some coincidence there, but how does that play out as far as you're looking for a certain quality of team, but you're also looking for representation?
So, there's a lot to consider. One is, at the base level, I want to get the 8 best quality teams that I can get. And 4 of those are going to come from Region 7. That's just, that's something that's not going to change every year. We host the event at a different site in Region 7 every year. And this event always is going to be grounded in some way in the Great Lakes region. But outside of that, it's, how can I get the 4 strongest teams to come in and face the best of Region 7? And 2, I would like to get some geographic uniqueness to the event. I would love to pull a team out of the Northeast. Ideally, I'd like to pull a team out of the South if I can get a team coming in from the West. I want to get some matchups that people don't get to see on a annual basis. So that's something to consider as well. Typically for me, there's a whiteboard process, and I know you guys are data guys. You guys like the whiteboarding. So I kind of have a dream list of every year of, these are kind of the first rate teams that I want to ask first. I also know I've got a list of teams that have already asked, to come to the event. That's also off on another pile. Obviously, if there's any overlap between those, that makes a pretty easy decision. But from there, it's you send your invitations out and you start working the event as best you can.
You mentioned, last year you kind of hit it big with 3 Final Four teams. I know I've seen you on Twitter say that you got lucky, or you don't know, you think you'll get that lucky again. But obviously, with your answer, it's clear you're searching those teams out. Like, you want the best of the best there. The other thing is, you're looking out into the future. So how are you making your judgments, or what's the trick? Like, how is that balance between, knowing what you can know to make sure the team is going to be as good as possible, and then, but also, trying to approach these teams far enough in advance where they're going to have availability to say yes if they're interested?
So starting early is the key in so many facets. So, next year's field is done, and we'll be announcing next year's field at this year's event for 2023. For me now, I'm working on 2024. So, we have a host in place already. And for me, usually around the December, January time period, 2 years before, I'm starting to dig through teams, stats pages, rosters, getting a feel for, the idea is to look for teams that have great sophomore-led teams. If you're looking 2 years out into the future, and obviously things happen, players leave, players transfer, and it's not an exact science. But if you can find a team that is super young, having success this year, with a lot of freshmen and sophomores on board, those teams go onto the whiteboard, right? Those are teams that I'm watching. Secondly, there's a pile of teams in Division III programs, as we like to call them, that are consistent year to year. You can always count on, and I'm thinking of Worcester's, I'm thinking of Wittenberg's, the UW Oshkosh's, Illinois Wesleyans of the world, where you don't really have to think in advance of am I worried about where those teams are going to be from year to year? There's always going to be a level of consistency and excellence that they're going to bring to the table where you can feel comfortable asking them years in advance and not have to worry about it too much. So those are the 2 things that I work through. As far as scheduling, again, starting early, when you're inviting teams 2 years in advance, at the D3 level, I don't find a ton of teams are scheduling that far in advance. So if you want the first choice of teams before they start booking out, 2 years is a good time period to start doing those things. Obviously, we do run into certain situations. I like to have the tournament, the weekend before Thanksgiving tends to be the traditional spot that I like to have it. And a lot of teams host their own events, over the weekend. They'll have a 4-team event the weekend before Thanksgiving, and those teams either aren't going to be available or they need to be talked into, supersizing their event for a year if they wanted to host. So getting on these things early is super key in terms of picking the right teams and scheduling them.
Now, you said you're going to announce the field during this year's event, but you won't pick the pairings at that point, will you? You'll wait to see what the matchups are going to be till later on?
Yeah, so typically the announcement of the teams and the host will happen at this year's event. So Friday night in Wabash, I think the Friday night primetime game is actually a Final Four. A couple of Final Four teams from last year, Marietta and Wabash, will play that final game on Friday night. So at halftime of that game, we'll announce the host and the participants for next year. But the matchups, I won't work on the matchups until this season is over.
Mm-hmm.
And one reason for that is, one, I don't want to repeat matchups that people have just seen. If for whatever, and I'm pulling two hypothetical teams, Oshkosh and Christopher Newport, if they play in a national semifinal this year, I may avoid that matchup again if both of them are going to be at the event the next fall. And then, for competitiveness, you want to try to put together interesting matchups, and you want to wait as long as possible to announce those matchups, so you have the full deck of information available to you based on the full results of the previous season.
So getting into the slate for this year, Friday, you've got 4 games: Trine versus Benedictine, Baldwin Wallace against Rose-Hulman, Keene State against Maryville, and then kind of that headliner for the day, like you mentioned, Marietta and Wabash in the 2012 Final Four matchup that didn't happen. That's a great first day, and this is why when we did our D3 bucket list episode, this was one of the events, because if you're a D3 fan, you just show up to the gym for the day. You've got 4 games, great games Friday, 4 great games Saturday. Just speak to the kind of event this is for spectators, just D3 hoops junkies.
Yeah, so this is a lot of fun. It's a long day. The nice thing is, every year we've had it so far is we've been able to have one ticket gets you in all day. So, we don't clear gyms in between. We don't have a couple of sessions each day. If you want to come in and pitch a tent from noon until 10 o'clock, you can do that. And believe me, there are a number of people that come in and will do that. I'm really excited about the event this year. I think it's a really balanced field this year. I think all 8 games have the potential to be super competitive. I really like the makeup of the field from a balance standpoint this year. It's a lot of fun. I would say the atmosphere builds throughout the day. The host always hosts the final games of the evening, so that that you get to watch the gym fill up over the course of the day, and by the halftime of game 3, there's a real buzz in the arena. Last year we had Marietta and Randolph-Macon as the closer for the event, and that was a 1 versus 3, and people were getting in during game 2 to make sure that they had the right seat for the final game. So it's just a lot of fun, and it's a unique event that we don't have enough of at the Division III level.
Yeah, it's super unique, like we mentioned before, to have 8 teams in one spot, and that really allows for a sampling of the region, as well as getting that flavor from outside the region to kind of get those measuring sticks for how the regions compare. It's such a fun thing. I haven't have the pleasure to go to one of these 8-team events, but just to even just watch it from home and see these matchups is very fun.
Yep. And then we get to regional ranking time, and it's events like this where we get the really interesting ones where you've got a team ranked in Region 5 that had this early season matchup against a Region 7 team, and there's that head to head, and then that factors in with the results versus regionally ranked. And yeah, I think it's really cool with that cross pollination, inviting the best from around the country. So just to round out the schedule, so Saturday, the dance partners change. Trine gets Rose-Hulman, Benedictine gets Baldwin Wallace, Keene State takes on Marietta, and then, as you mentioned, the host gets that last game Saturday as well. Maryville will be playing at Wabash. A couple teams that really stick out to me in this field are Keene State and Maryville. I think some a couple schools that had some success last year, but they really seem to be popping up on some lists, for top games. It seems like they really have made an effort to increase their strength of schedule this year. So great to see them.
Yeah, Keene State this is actually their second appearance in the Great Lakes Invitational. They came out to Worcester a couple of years ago. I know they are a program that it's a little bit tougher for them to get, I would say, into the Midwest, being in New Hampshire. So they look forward to opportunities like this, and they certainly don't shy away from coming to the Midwest, looking for some good games. And Maryville was a case last year where they were a constant conversation around the SOS with Maryville and the high winning percentage, low SOS teams. And I think they took it upon themselves this year, not just at the Great Lakes Invitational, but if you look at their non-conference schedule across the board, they really wanted that to not be a factor this year. And they were going to, get in or not get in on the merits of playing tough games. And this is certainly another weekend for them where they're trying to do that.
Yeah, I think that they were in our top 50 games list 4 or 5 times. And so this is only 2 of them.
Yeah.
So they're doing a great job. It's not just relying on, we're going to the GLI. We'll know we're going to get a couple good games. That kind of, that'll be good for our non-conference schedule. They're really going above and beyond. Ryan, what do you see as the future here for the GLI? Do you feel like this is you've kind of got it to the point where it's like we're getting great teams, great notoriety? Like, this is what I always wanted. We just got to, keep this running. Or do you have other things in mind? Like, what are you looking at going beyond this season?
It would be easy to kind of say that the event is kind of at the top of where it's going to be, and now it's just kind of a maintain. But I think for me, there's a number of things I would like to do to make the event bigger and better, and there's certainly some, like, I would say, a big wish list of things that I would love to do. With the event starting to get some national recognition, starting to be well known, across the D3 landscape, I would love to get a regional sponsor involved in some way, if that's possible. One, I would love to have some additional resources to put into the event. One of the things that I really like to make a point in this event is to make it feel different from other D3 events or D3 weekends, where you're going to a 4-team event at a college for the weekend, playing in front of a half-empty gym. I like this to feel more like a bowl game experience, a college football bowl game experience. I want, if in a perfect world, if I had the resources, I'd love to add an extra day to the event. I would love to do a banquet the night before for all of the teams involved. We do several, I would say, giveaways for players when they come to the event. This year, we're doing some winter beanies for all the players coming in with the logo on it. T-shirts with the logos. We did a backpack last year for all of the players, rally towels for everyone in the stands. So, if we had the resources, I would love to do more of that to make the event more special for the student athletes. And then second, if we're talking real pipe dreams, I would love to be able to get the event at a neutral site, whether that's, in a city, Cleveland, Grand Rapids, nothing too big. I don't want it to feel cavernous, but to be able to give it more of a big time college basketball feel, where if we could have 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people in a pretty good medium sized arena, that would be a lot of fun too. But if you guys have any connections or know anyone, let me know.
I'll work on my arena operator Rolodex and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, mine's empty, so let me know.
Hey, one question I had, you mentioned Great Lakes has morphed into Region 7 at this point. Do you see your event still being tied to Region 7, or still in the larger geographic picture of kind of what is the Great Lakes region in the United States? How do you kind of see that both now and maybe moving forward?
I've gotten this question a lot. What defines the Great Lakes region? Is it the old traditional Great Lakes region, before we had the numbered regions? And for me, that was it. I was always tied to that old Great Lakes region, which now unfortunately doesn't include the Heartland region has been cut out of that as they've moved over to Region 8. Mm-hmm. I'm not completely closed to the idea of extending the tournament footprint to the Great Lakes region geographically as a whole. States that touch Great Lakes. So, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, or, Minnesota, Wisconsin, even up into New York. I haven't yet. I haven't had anyone approach me about hosting it outside of Region 7. But I'm not saying I wouldn't say no if somebody wanted to do that.
Yeah, I guess in some ways the naming change uncouples you from what is the NCAA's definition of the Great Lakes region, if you so desired.
No, I still call it the Great Lakes region. I'm not a fan of the numbered regions. I think it's so impersonable.
Yeah.
To me, it will always be the Great Lakes region.
The Region 7 Invitational just doesn't
It
have the same
doesn't ring
ring
the same.
to it. No. I
This
think you're
this
good. I think you're good there.
This Week in Region 7 is not a great podcast either.
Ryan, we really appreciate your time, as is D3 Hoops content creator tradition, I guess, at this point. We'll give you the final word. One thing I did want to mention, however, we probably should have mentioned at the beginning with the introduction is that you made an appearance with Bob Quillman on the QCast back in his season 1, episode 18. So we'll link to that in the show description and encourage anyone to go check that out if they haven't already watched that QCast episode. Just you get into a little bit more of your background just in general with Division 3. And here we wanted to really just focus on the GLI, but obviously your experience in Division 3 goes well beyond that, which you had a nice, well-rounded conversation with Bob Quillman, which he has a way of doing with all his guests. So really want to point that out, encourage everyone to go check out your appearance on the QCast season 1, episode 18. But other than that, anything else as a final word?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys. I love the idea of the Datacast. I think of how much the D3 community has expanded in media in the last couple of years with, as you mentioned, the QCast and this now with the Datacast. And it's great to have so many more voices, for our community that we love, Division 3. We're such a small niche in the grand scheme of the sports world, but there are so many of us here that are so passionate about it, and it's so nice. I think the student athletes at this level deserve that promotion and that recognition, and I'm just excited to get to spend another year with you guys and trying to be those ambassadors for those student athletes and those programs that we love.
Yeah, I mean, at the Division 3 level, aren't big entities doing those things for us. So it's people like you doing the work of, I'm going to create an event and we'll see how it goes. And it turns into a big thing. And that's what's great about the community is it just is people taking it upon themselves to create something for the Division 3 community, for the student athletes. And really enjoy to see what you've done and to follow this event and to follow your work in Division 3, because it contributes a lot to the Division 3 community.
Appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, we had a great time hanging out in Fort Wayne. It was great to meet you there in person. And looking forward to wrap up the season, with you there again and all the discussion that'll take place along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And don't be a stranger. Come out to a future event.
We'd love to do that.